I caught my girlfriend cheating with my close friend, turned him into the police, and cut off all contact with her. My wife, Rachel, and I grew up in a pretty big town with a population of about 30,000 people. We knew each other from a young age, around 6 years old. We were practically inseparable. At 16, we started dating. When we turned 18, we moved to a city for work, located just a few hours' drive from our hometown. By 20, we were married and bought our first home. At 22, she became pregnant with a boy, and that's when disaster struck. About 5 weeks before she was due to go on maternity leave, a large shelving structure collapsed and crushed her. I was told that she and our baby died instantly. 2 of her colleagues were also injured in the accident. One was left paralyzed, the other lost a leg that had to be amputated. The thing is, the company she worked for, in an effort to save money, decided to continue using old shelving that had been deemed unsafe instead of replacing it. To this day, I can't forgive the executives and managers who made that decision, because they robbed me of the love of my life and killed our unborn child. Shortly after, I was informed that I had a choice on how to proceed with what the company called compensation and what I called blood money. They wanted to settle the matter out of court to avoid a lawsuit. I, on the other hand, craved justice. Fortunately, thanks to widespread media coverage of the event and the involvement of several politicians, the case was quickly settled in court over about 3 years. As a result, the compensation for all parties was almost 10 times higher than what those bastards originally offered. The company was fined for numerous violations of health and safety regulations, a number of executives were fired, some ended up in prison, and so on. During this time, I continued to work at a telecommunications company. My mother, bless her soul, moved in with me to help while all of this was happening. I don't think I would have coped if she hadn't been so involved. Around this time, I was offered a promotion, but it involved frequent travel across the state. I requested an office in my hometown's branch, as I wanted to not only handle business across the state, but also work in my hometown where the company had no representative. They agreed. After a few months, everything settled down. I also decided to buy a house in my hometown so I wouldn't have to stay with my parents every time I came back home, and so I could come and go as I pleased. This is important for the rest of the story. 4 years passed. I had just returned from one of my trips on a Friday and was taking care of things at the office when Harry, the branch's managing director, walked into my office. We grew up together, but went to different schools, and after I moved back, we became close friends. He asked how I was doing, then suggested I come to a party at his house that evening. It was a last-minute invitation, but I agreed. I felt like I needed a drink with friends. It was there that Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new employee at the branch where my hometown office was located and was just getting to know the team. It was a new city for her. We hit it off immediately. As cliché as it sounds, it felt like it wasn't Catherine in front of me, but the deceased Rachel. I won't bore you with unnecessary details, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step, and she moved into my house in my hometown. Up to this point, everything was going very well. Catherine got along with my parents. Rachel's parents also approved of her and were happy that someone could make me as happy as Rachel had. Everything was going great for almost a year until something started to change. Video calls would suddenly be cut short. Neighbors told me that a car matching the description of Harry's was often seen parked in the alley behind my house when I was away. Clothes that didn't belong to me appeared in the closet. Everything pointed to her cheating, but she assured me that everything was fine. She said Harry sometimes dropped by to discuss work matters and so on, but never stayed the night. I wrote, "It offers my paranoia," and continued living as if nothing had happened, but I still felt that something was wrong. About 6 months later, I discovered she was lying. I had just closed a pretty big contract with a new company, and the negotiations ended earlier than I expected. Instead of staying there for a few more days, I decided to pay for an early flight home and surprise everyone. A few hours later, I arrived in my hometown and drove into the alley behind the house to enter unnoticed and surprise Catherine. But a part of me still wanted to find out if that mysterious car would be there. And indeed, a car was there, blocking the back entrance. I was instantly confused, thinking it was just an inconsiderate neighbor who had parked there, until I realized it was indeed Harry's car. I parked behind his car, got out, and thought how strange it was that he was here so late. She claimed He always left earlier. Approaching the back of the house, I saw something that made my heart sink. I froze. Time stood still. In the kitchen was my close friend being intimate with my girlfriend on my kitchen countertop. I didn't know what to do. 1,000 questions swirled in my head. Was this real? Or was I dreaming? Why were they doing this in my house? Feeling broken, I turned and left without being seen. I got into my car and sat there for what felt like an eternity. I cried hard, but sadness quickly turned to anger, the same anger I felt towards those responsible for Rachel's death. And I wanted to hurt them badly. As a pacifist, I don't believe in violence. Then I realized I would punish them in a different way by destroying their lives. I backed up down the alley, far enough from my driveway to still see Harry's car, and then returned to the gate where I could see the house and called her. They were still at it when the phone rang. They both glanced at the screen and looked at each other when they saw my name. I could see she was debating whether to answer. She just didn't pick up. A few moments later, they were back at it and I called her number again. This time she answered. As soon as she picked up, I ended the call and headed back to my car. Shortly after, she called me back. She asked why I was calling so late, and I told her I'd be home in 10 minutes and didn't want to startle her when I arrived. She was obviously shocked and pretended to be happy I was coming back. The conversation ended very quickly after she said she was going to change. I said goodbye and hung up. A few moments later, Harry flew out of the gate, still half dressed, jumped into his car, and sped off as if he were being chased. I smiled a little, knowing the fear they both felt from almost being caught. I waited a bit before parking my car in the same spot Harry had been just minutes earlier. The rest of the night was pretty calm, and only when she fell asleep did I get up and go to my office at the end of the hall. I couldn't sleep. I needed a plan, and I got to work on it. My mother always taught me to be a pacifist and let karma run its course, but in this case, I decided karma could use a little help. I decided to punish them separately but destroy both of their lives. I knew Harry was into drugs, nothing too serious, but he kept it a secret. I found out by accident when I saw some powder and plants at his house, but pretended not to notice when he tried to hide everything. I started calling clients who were involved in shady dealings and made a few inquiries about buying drugs. A few weeks later, I had a large enough stash for my plan to work. About a month later, I hosted a barbecue for friends, including Harry. After making sure Harry had had enough to drink, I offered to let him stay the night and sleep it off. Early in the morning, I took the powder, some of my personal belongings, and placed them in different spots in his car. I hid the largest amount in the spare tire well, confident he wouldn't find it for several months while my plan was being implemented. I locked the car and went to sleep. I also planted some more powder and personal items in his house when I drove him there, as he was too drunk to drive himself. A few days later, I staged a robbery by breaking the back glass on my kitchen door and leaving the door open before heading to the airport. When I landed, I had several messages, one from my clearly terrified mum who had found the broken door and called the police, one from Catherine who was crying, and one from the local police asking me to call back. I informed the police that I was on a business trip and would be back next week to talk to them. While I was away, I asked Catherine to stay with my parents until my return and asked my father to arrange for the installation of cameras and an alarm system by a local security company. Upon returning home, I played the usual scene, "Oh my God, I can't believe this happened, and who would do such a thing?" After a thorough check of all the rooms and discovering that my personal belongings were missing, I filed a police report and invited a representative from the security company to explain to Catherine and me how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the question I was waiting for, the question about what to do if we were engaged in some activities and didn't want them to be recorded. She looked a bit embarrassed asking the question, but I knew exactly why she asked it. The guy assured us that this question is asked often and showed us on the home computer how to disable recording for specific cameras to maintain privacy. As I walked him to the door, I asked if it was possible to enable notifications for when the cameras were turned off, just for security. He came back and helped me set up email notifications, then left. Perfect. All I had to do was wait. At this stage, I consulted a lawyer for help with family law matters in my country. I needed to make sure my upcoming plan could be legally executed and that I wouldn't be obligated to pay Catherine money or give her a share of the property, as I wasn't sure if we were considered de facto spouses or not. Being the sole heir to Rachel's estate. I didn't want any unpleasant surprises where Catherine could claim a part of the property. A big thank you to him, as he assured me that even though we had been dating for almost 4 years, we hadn't lived together long enough to be considered de facto spouses. And since I paid all the utilities and Catherine didn't pay rent, she had no legal grounds to demand money from me. However, to be safe, he drafted what seemed to me to be an ironclad document in case any legal issues arose. The following week, my employer offered me a promotion with a move back to the city to lead the team I worked on, which meant I wouldn't have to travel as often and would work in one place. The move would take about 6 weeks. Perfect, more than enough time to gather all the evidence. The next week, back in my hometown, I began to implement the rest of my plan. I asked Harry to approve a week's vacation for Catherine in 2 weeks. I told him I wanted to send her and a couple of friends on a getaway before taking the most important step in my life for a second time. He jumped up and gave me a big hug, congratulating me on being ready to take that step again. I hugged him back, but not in the way he probably imagined at that moment. He agreed and reserved the required week. I asked him not to tell anyone about it, as he wanted to make it a big surprise. I knew that rumors would spread quickly through the office, but that was part of my plan. That same evening, I told Catherine that I had booked her and 2 of her friends a trip to a tropical spa resort for a week. All expenses paid, no questions asked. Choose 2 friends and come back to the biggest surprise of your life. She screamed with joy like a child who was told the entire candy store now belonged to her. Then I told her that for the next week, I would be in the city preparing for a meeting with a major client, and then I would fly out and not be back until Monday, when she would already be leaving. She was a little disappointed by this, but I assured her that the surprise when she returned would be worth it. What I didn't tell her was that I had decided to take a 2-week vacation on the other side of the country to mentally prepare for the storm that was about to break as soon as she got on the plane, and at the same time, enjoy the first stage of my freedom. On Sunday, 2 weeks later, I returned and drove home. When I arrived, I drove past the house and, of course, Harry's car was there, just like the first night I caught them. I parked a little further down and checked the cameras. They were asleep in my bed. No surprise, considering I had recorded their intimate activities for the 2 weeks I was away. Then I made the first call to the police. I said I was one of the neighbors and I saw someone loitering in their car in the alley behind my house, and from time to time, passing something through the windows to passing cars, also looking into my yard, and that I was worried he was either selling drugs or was about to break into someone's house. I gave them his license plate number and a description. They said someone would be there in a few minutes. I thanked them and hung up. Then I called Catherine and said I'd be home in 10 minutes and that even though I knew she was leaving tomorrow, I desperately wanted to surprise her now. Rewatching the footage, I laugh at the commotion that erupted in there, and I'm surprised I didn't hear it all from the street. A few seconds later, Harry, half naked, flew out the back door to his car. I couldn't have imagined a more perfect turn of events. As Harry was speeding away, one of the police cars turned the corner next to me, saw Harry driving away at high speed, and began to pursue him. After I parked, I greeted and flustered Catherine, and we did all the usual couple things. She fell asleep again, and I, of course, couldn't sleep. The next day, a taxi picked her and her friends up. After they left, I had to wait a few hours and then began to implement my plan. I called a friend who worked in moving and asked him to help me pack and move my things on Friday. After we agreed on a time, I told him that some boxes would need to be taken to a storage unit. He agreed. Then I started packing Catherine's things. Later that day, the police called and asked me to come and identify some items they had seized from a suspect last night, which matched the description of the stolen property I had reported. I smirked, pleased that my plan for Harry was starting to come to fruition, and replied that I would be there soon to pick up the items. Of course, when I arrived, some items were still missing, as they were probably in his house and the police hadn't searched it yet. At this point, the whole town was already talking about what happened. In a small town, such events don't stay secret for long. Harry was disgraced and immediately fired for possession of drugs and stolen property, and our bosses, on behalf of the company, gave me an official apology. That evening, I went to my parents' house and told them and Rachel's parents what had happened, omitting some details. I said that I was moving back to the city after my promotion, but without the chitter Catherine. They were upset that I hadn't told them everything sooner, but were pleased that I was handling everything with dignity and not stooping to their level, although they approved of my plan to just disappear from Catherine's life. After a few drinks, laughs, and tears, I returned home. On Friday afternoon, after a busy week of arranging for cleaners for the following week, preparing the house for rent, and handling various tasks at the hometown office, I packed some things in my car and stopped by my parents to say goodbye. Before I left, I visited Becky. Becky was one of Rachel's closest friends in childhood. She was the only person who knew what was happening, except for the details concerning Harry. Without her help, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything so quickly. I gave Becky a large envelope with the collected evidence of Catherine's affair, as well as a letter and several other legal documents from my lawyer, stating that Catherine was prohibited from contacting me and details on how she could retrieve her belongings from the storage unit I had rented. After a quick goodbye, I drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to a ton of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. It turned out that Catherine had come home early because she was told something was happening in town and found an empty house with a for rent sign out front. In a panic, she went to my parents, who closed the door on her, which led her to call everyone until she somehow got in touch with Becky and found out she had a little package for her. As I was told, she didn't take it very well, which was to be expected. Judging by the numerous angry messages from her, accusing me of framing Harry, I was worried she might show up at my doorstep, but nothing of the sort happened. And now I'll answer the most popular questions I've been asked about this whole story. First, what happened to Harry? Why did I treat him so harshly? And why have I compromised myself online by telling you this story? Harry is facing a few months in jail, as this is his first offense, but he might get out even earlier. And I believe it was necessary. I omitted a few key details that could have allowed me to be precisely identified, and I also changed the descriptions of places to create the impression that this story could have happened anywhere in the world. There was already enough evidence in Harry's house. I just gave the police a reason for further investigation into his activities. I don't regret what I did to him, as he knew both me and Rachel since childhood and knew how hard it was for me to get back on my feet after her death. As for Catherine, she considered herself a socialite, her words. She highly valued her social status, and I knew that the exposure would kill her reputation. What happened to her? Rumors of her affair spread throughout the town, and of course, her reputation was indeed destroyed. I was informed that she recently moved to another state, as it was no longer comfortable for her to stay in this town. Many have wondered about the legality of what I did with her belongings, moving them out, sending her friends on a trip, spending a considerable amount of money on it, and so on. Morally, I understand that it's a pretty low move. The high of what she thought was about to happen, combined with the destruction of her status in the town, was my ultimate goal, to make her feel what it's like when everything around you comes crashing down. But from a legal standpoint, I had every right to do so. In conclusion, for those of you who claim my story is fake, that I'm just chasing fame, that I'm a sociopath, well, who doesn't have some sociopathic tendencies these days? Call me whatever you like. I don't care. So, what do you think of the whole story? Was the author right to do what he did? My opinion, he did almost nothing serious to Catherine, who actually deserved the ultimate revenge. At the same time, he punished Harry too severely. Yes, of course, he's a scoundrel. After all, he was a friend and knew how hard his friend was taking the breakup and still did all this. But did he deserve jail? The question is debatable, of course, but from a legal standpoint, definitely not. And from my point of view either. As for Catherine, not only did he not say everything to her face, as if he was afraid, but he also paid for a week at a spa resort with her friends, plus allowed her to cheat on him for another month and a half. That's just unthinkable. Anyway, write your opinion in the comments, whether you agree with me or not. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Watch our previous video, which you'll see right here, and I wish you luck in your relationships.